I'm so nervous to do this, not because of what I'm going to talk about, but because public speaking is a huge fear of mine. I just don't do it. I don't talk on my stories. I don't do lives. But I'm trying to encourage other women to be more confident and come out of their comfort zone. So I should really be doing that myself. If I look down in the video, it's just because I'm referring to notes that I've made, because I don't want to forget anything. So I just wanted to do a video about my own personal journey with alcohol abuse. Some of you have probably seen posts that I've done or quotes, but you can't really get forward enough in that as what you can on a video. So this is just my personal journey that I wanted to share, and hopefully it can help somebody else. Okay, so my problems with alcohol didn't start until I had my second child. The split with their dad was quite an unpleasant one, and my mental health took a bit of a bad turn, and I started having panic attacks. And anyone who's had a panic attack will tell you that they are just the most horrendous feeling in the world. And I had the first one I had, I think, was at night time. And I just got this overwhelming feeling that I couldn't breathe. My hands would sort of seize up in this position, so I couldn't move them from hyperventilating, and it was awful. And that was at night time that I had that. So then every night when I started to go to bed after that, I'd be thinking, oh my God, it's getting to night time. I'm going to have these horrible feelings and emotions again. And because I was thinking that, it happened every single time I went to bed. And I remember one night, I was pacing around the house trying to regulate my breathing and trying to get things under control. And I had some wine in the fridge, and I had a glass of the wine, and as if by magic, these feelings disappeared. My breathing came back to normal. I didn't feel as stressed. I calmed right down straight away, and I went to bed and I managed to go to sleep. And unfortunately, alcohol, it does help with things like panic attacks, and it's really shit that it works, but it does. So I started relying on that every single night when I went to bed. I was having a glass, maybe some nights 2 glasses of wine, in order to be able to go to bed and fall asleep and not have these horrible emotions and feelings of panic and not being able to breathe. So that's kind of how the cycle started, for me. Before long, 1 or 2 glasses of wine didn't work, and I was then having to drink a bottle of wine to go to bed every single night. And then it started happening during the day as well. So if I was going out for lunch with friends or for coffee with friends, I wouldn't have a coffee or a water. I'd always have a wine. And at this point, people started to pick up that I was drinking quite a lot. And usually I never really drank to get drunk. I knew enough to have just to kind of take the edge off them feelings. But sometimes I hadn't calculated it right and I lost count of what I drank. And sometimes I would drink a lot more than what I needed to for the reasons that I was using it. And there were a couple of occasions when I had drunk too much during the day and ended up falling asleep or passing out whilst I was looking after my 2 then very small children. Fortunately, nothing ever happened to them. Not saying that it could have happened, something terrible could have happened to them. But I was really fortunate that it didn't. And luckily, a friend or family member wasn't able to get hold of me at this point, so somebody would turn up at the house and would walk in to me being passed out, and my children, who were 2 and 3 at the time, just sort of running around the house and looking after themselves. So when that happened, the children would then be taken usually to my mum's for the evening, and I'd be told, get yourself together, do what you're doing, just, do what you're doing tonight and come back a different person tomorrow and we'll bring the kids back. But unfortunately, it happened quite a few times more. And to cut a long story short, The children were taken one night, and little did I know that they wouldn't actually be returned to me for 5 years. During that time when this happened, I actually moved away from my hometown. Biggest mistake of my life. When my drinking was not quite bad but quite erratic, I would make really rash decisions, and I made a decision one night to just up and leave and like the next day with the children. So I did that, and I moved 2 hours away. So I was away from all my support network, all my family, all my friends, and it was while I was away that the children were actually taken, because things were just getting worse and worse and worse. I got into another really bad relationship, a person who also drank a lot, so we were drinking together constantly in the house. There were drugs being used. So yeah, so that happened, and the children left and went to stay with my mum. Now, when the kids were with me, that was my tiny little thing to hold on to that made me not be completely out of control. So at that point, I still had a reason to be normal most of the time and only drink sometimes. But when they left, and anybody watching this who has had a child removed from their care, and I'm not saying it was the wrong thing to do, I'm not, it was probably the right thing to do at the time, but for a mum to be separated from her children, it's soul destroying pain. Like, it's unnatural. So at that point, I pretty much hit the fuck it button and thought, you know what, they were the last thing I had to try and keep a little bit normal. I don't have them anymore. And I started to go off the rails from that point. It wasn't long after that, a couple of months, and then I came back to Milton Keynes and got my head together and said, come on, you know, this needs to stop. You don't have your children anymore. You need to do something about this. And my best friend actually let me stay with her for a couple of months when I first come back. But I hadn't stopped drinking. I was still drinking, and she had small children herself at that point. And after a few months, it just wasn't really appropriate that I stay there anymore. So I then went to Milton Keynes Council and explained my situation and said, you know, I've had my children removed. This XYZ was the problem. You know, I'm not doing that anymore. I want to get myself back on track. But obviously I can't have my children back, or I can't even have them to stay because I don't have anywhere to live. And they basically said to me, because you don't have care of your children anymore, we, as the council, have no duty of care to you whatsoever. They didn't care about the mental health problems I was having, how vulnerable I was. They just said, no, you have no minors living with you. There's nothing we can do. And they sent me away with my case and a little piece of paper with tips on it and advice on how to keep warm and safe being street homeless. So I left the council in shock and was really upset. I had nowhere to go. And I remember coming out and trying to spot other homeless people, because there's quite a lot around the council, and I was looking down underpasses and I was thinking, you know, maybe I could make friends with some other homeless people, or maybe I could make friends with a couple of like guys and they'll maybe look after me. And then just the reality hit, and I thought, you wouldn't survive one night being street homeless. I thought, if I have to sleep outside tonight, I'm actually going to die. And I'd 4% left on my battery at this point as well. So I texted a friend of mine just as sort of a last resort, because I knew my battery was going to die, and said, you know, explained the situation. I said, I've got nowhere to go tonight. I'm going to have to sleep outside. Like, I don't know what to do. My battery's going to die. And he actually got back to me and said, I've spoken to a good friend of mine and he's actually going to let you sleep on his sofa. He said, you know, I trust him implicitly. Nothing will happen to you. You'll be in good hands. So I said, okay, you know, fine. And I remember he come and picked me up and took me to a shared house that he lived in at the time, and gave me the couch. And the only reason I'm including this in the story is because as much as some real unbelievably bad things have happened to me because of alcohol, I've actually had some real acts of kindness as well. So I just wanted to put that in. So this guy took me to the shared house and gave me the sofa. I managed to get a job to start a couple of days after in a tanning salon. And I remember this guy went out the next day and bought me a massive bag of toiletries. I didn't have a hairbrush, I didn't have a toothbrush, I didn't have any clothes. I had nothing except from the clothes I was wearing. And I was always thinking, you know, oh, he's going to want something in return for this. People aren't just this nice. And I said to him about 4 days after staying there, I just asked him, why are you doing this? Like, you don't know me, you don't owe me anything. Why are you doing this for me? And he said, you know, I come to this country myself a few years ago in a similar situation to you, and I had nothing. And complete strangers did for me what I am doing for you. And I really hope that if one day you're in a similar situation, that you will do the same thing for somebody else. So almost pay it forward. And I'll never forget that guy. We parted ways a couple of months afterwards, and I've not heard from him since. And it's just a real act of kindness that will just stay with me. And he never wanted anything in return. He didn't even want, you know, so much as the money back for the toiletries he bought me. He was giving me a lift into work and picking me up just to get me back on my feet. Which I did at this point. And then because I was back on my feet and feeling really good, I started going out drinking with friends, because I thought, you know, my mental health's fine. It absolutely wasn't, but I didn't know at this point. I thought my mental health's absolutely fine. I can go out socially again. I can go out and start drinking with friends. But the reality is I can't do that. It always leads into excessive drinking again, drinking during the day. I started not showing up for work and lost my job, which subsequently meant I lost the room that I'd managed to get in the shared house. So I was back to square one, and I was then offered another job at this point in a pub. Absolutely shouldn't have taken it. It was the worst possible job that I could have taken. But the thing is, with this job, it came with live-in free accommodation. And not only did I not have a job, I was again homeless at this point. So I took that job in the pub, and I got to rent a bedroom upstairs for free. And it was the sort of pub where you're allowed to drink while you're working, which was the complete wrong environment for me. I always took it too far, was drinking too much. I'd always turn up for work, but not always in the best of states, and I ended up leaving that job as well. At this point as well, I was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. So throughout all these years, I had been going to the doctors constantly, even when my first panic attack started and they just put me on various different antidepressants. I kept going back to the doctor saying, I'm not depressed, I've got nothing to be depressed about, I've got 2 beautiful children, I've got an amazing family, I've got a massive circle of friends, I've got a lovely home. Obviously before the children left, this was. And I was just told, no, you know, you're depressed, try this antidepressant, try this meal, try that dose, try sleeping tablets, try having a hot bath before bed. And none of it worked. So I eventually went to an appointment with a psychologist or a psychiatrist and was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, which is now known as emotionally unstable personality disorder. So at this point I was on a load of different medication. I was on antipsychotics, on sleeping tablets, on antidepressants, still drinking on top of all of these tablets because they just weren't treating the mental health that I was suffering with. So after I left the pub, I'm not going to go into too much detail what happened here, because I want this video purely to be about alcohol abuse. I will touch slightly on mental health and domestic violence, but I don't want to go too much into it. So something happened after I left the pub and there was a fire. I was actually trapped inside the building and had to be cut out of the roof by the fire services. I had been drinking that day, so I probably stunk of alcohol when they cut me out. And I was instantly arrested at the scene for arson. So I was taken to the police station, just thrown into a cell and left there for 7 hours without any medical attention, nothing. Had my interview and then was released pending further investigation. Yeah, so as you can imagine, after that, my mental health was just going from bad to worse. Every time something would happen and it would be awful, I'd think, right, this must be rock bottom. It can't possibly get any worse than this. But unfortunately, it always did get worse and worse. I always thought I was really strong and I didn't need any help, and I needed somebody at that point to intervene and get me help. I did go to numerous doctor's appointments and they always referred me on for counselling, but usually when that counselling appointment come around, I'd gone into a really bad state and I wasn't able to go. So I needed somebody to take me. But again, I wouldn't ask for the help because I thought I was just this really strong, independent woman. I thought I can do this all by myself. But the fact is I wasn't. I was so vulnerable. I was just going from one abusive relationship to the next. Each relationship, violence-wise, was worse than the one before. And the 6 months after the fire happened, I was in an extremely abusive relationship and have been left with multiple physical injuries from that. After 6 months, I managed to escape that relationship, and again I approached Milton Keynes Council, but at this point I got into the council and just collapsed hysterically on the floor. I was taken into a private room and had to explain to a couple of members of staff my situation and what had been happening. And they said, basically, you're too high risk for us to house in Milton Keynes. We can't house you here. I said, this isn't going to get any better until I'm around my support network, until I'm around my children. I feel like I've nothing to live for. And they said, no, we can't house you here. And we need to send you to a women's refuge. So the only space they had available was in Slough. So I went down to this women's refuge and stayed there for about 10 days, I think. But again, because it was a safe house, I wasn't allowed to have anybody come and visit me. Still wasn't seeing my children. Still didn't really have much of a relationship with my family. And I just didn't see an end at this point. And I thought, the only way this is going to end is if I end it myself. So I locked myself in my room after about 10 days of being in this refuge and drank a load of alcohol. And like I said, I was on a ridiculous amount of medication, and I took a load of tablets and woke up in a hospital bed with no recollection of how I got there. I was told afterwards that when the ambulance turned up, they weren't able to break the bedroom door down, so they had to call the fire brigade out and put a ladder. Luckily, my window was open, so they put a ladder up and climbed through the window and took me out that way. I was told that the amount I had taken, if I'd been asleep for 15 minutes longer, I more than likely would have gone into a coma that I may or may not have woken up from. And I was kept in hospital under observation in Slough for a week. Bearing in mind the reasons that I was in there, so I was completely open and honest with them. I told them everything. I said, look, this is what I've been doing, this is what I've been drinking, this is what I've been taking, and this is what I'm doing it. I need help. And I was in there for a week and didn't see a single member of anybody from mental health. I remember saying to them after about 5 days, crying, saying, you can't release me from here because I've got nowhere to go. About 2 days after being in hospital, I had a phone call from the ladies who run the refuge where I was staying, and they said, we know what's happened and you can't stay here any longer. And I said, I've got nowhere else to go. And they were like, it's not a problem, you just can't stay here. And they brought my suitcase and my luggage up and just dumped it by my hospital bed, which was so embarrassing. Then after 5 days, I was saying to the hospital staff, I need to speak to, there must be somebody in this hospital that can help me. I've been brought in for an attempted overdose. I'm telling you, I've got nowhere to go. Like, when I leave here, surely you cannot just release me onto the streets with nothing. And their words were, this isn't a hotel, this is a hospital. So I was released from there after a week. And I managed to, in the last day of staying at the hospital, I was ringing around loads of hostels and I managed to get a bed at a hostel in Luton. And it was a real dingy, horrible hostel. It was just full of middle-aged men that were just drinking neat alcohol from the second they woke up to the second they went to bed at night. There were a couple of younger people in there as well, and everyone was just sort of joining in and just sitting in communal areas drinking. So that's exactly what I carried on doing. And I was only there for about a month, and then a load of people, including myself, got kicked out of there as well. and I'd met somebody in Luton, just somebody who used to come and visit someone in the hostel, and he said, you know, come and stay with me, I'll let you share my room, because again, I was going to be street homeless. I went to Luton Council and said, you know, my hometown can't house me because I'm too high risk, because of the violent relationship I'd just come away from. And they said, that's not our problem, there's nothing we can do, you don't have any local ties to this area, you need to go back to your council. So I approached Milton Keynes Council again, and they said, no, nothing we can do, we can't help you. So this guy stepped in and said, you know, I'll give you a place to stay. So I ended up staying with somebody again in another shared house, full of people taking drugs constantly, drinking constantly. I was having to do things, really unpleasant things that I didn't want to do in order to have this bed to stay in and food to eat. At this point, I didn't even have a bank account, so I couldn't claim benefits. There's nowhere on earth I could have worked because I was in such a vulnerable state. So I was just drinking pretty much to get through the day again, and drinking to have to do things that I was having to do to keep my head above water. And it was not long after that I was called back to the courts, because I was still released at this point on bail for the arson charge, and I went not guilty, and it went to trial, and I was actually found guilty and given a 12-month prison sentence, which at the time I thought was really unfair. I thought, I can't go to prison. Like, there was no evidence of the fire, but it was assumed that I had started it because of my mental health background, because I was actually drunk at the time and I was the only person in the building. It makes a lot of sense that it would have been me that started it, but to this day I can honestly say I have no recollection of what happened that day. So maybe I did, perhaps I didn't, but I'll never know. But nonetheless, I got found guilty of it anyway and got sentenced to 12 months in prison. I did 4 months in prison and then was released early on an electronic tag. So I went to they would only release me if I had a known address that I could stay at. And I'd been homeless for years at this point, and there wasn't a family member that was going to put me up on tag. All my friends have got children. Nobody was going to let somebody with alcohol abuse problems, extreme mental health problems, and who's just been released from prison go and stay with them. So I had to wait for a placement to come up at a BAS hostel, which one came up in Bristol. I didn't realise how far away Bristol was from where my family and friends are. So I went to this BAS hostel from leaving prison. And what did I do when I come out of prison? After being in prison for 4 months, obviously I couldn't drink in prison. I went on loads of courses for alcohol, relapse prevention, loads. I come out with a really good mindset, but I would come out, and as soon as I got to the hostel, I went and bought 2 bottles of wine from the shop to celebrate coming out of jail. Worst thing to do, because I can't just drink to celebrate. It brings back it's too much of a bad habit for me, drinking. So if I start drinking, even for a good reason, at some point or another, it will just escalate and spiral out of control. So I went to this hostel, nicked 2 bottles of wine the day I come out to celebrate coming out of jail, and there was another woman staying in the hostel as well in the next room. It was just the 2 of us, and she actually had her boyfriend sneaking in the evenings, but he was really badly beating her up. So I had to listen to that through the wall. I had to listen to her being thrown around the room, her screaming. I could physically hear him hitting her. And there was absolutely nothing I could do but just to sit and listen. So again, then my drinking started getting out of control, listening to that. And I remember ringing my probation officer pretty much on a daily basis now, saying, you know, I can't stay here. This has given me too many bad flashbacks of my own experiences. I'm drinking all the time. I don't want to be doing this. And she gave me luckily another placement come up at a 24-hour manned or a 24-hour staffed hostel in Reading. So it's nearer to my family. I was going to be looked after constantly. So I went to the other place in Reading and got on amazingly there for 4 months. The support was second to none. I had an amazing key worker. In the 4 months I stayed there, I only actually got drunk once, which for me was really, really good. Yeah, and I'd just gotten so well there. The support was amazing. But then after 4 months, I had to leave the hostel, and I managed to get a little bed sit in Reading on my own. And again, when you leave with no follow-on support. You're kind of just expected to just go and deal with the world by yourself. And I hadn't dealt with the world for such a long time at this point. I had gone from hospital beds to hostels to prisons to, always sort of being under the care of somebody. And now I was just kind of released and told, do it on your own. And I couldn't. And as soon as I got my little bed sit in Reading, again, I was away from my family, away from my children, still didn't have really a relationship with anybody, didn't speak to any of my friends, and I just started drinking again. So I moved in there in the November, and I drank pretty much solidly up till about Christmas. Then on Christmas Day, I ended up in hospital in the walk-in centre, and ended up collapsing in there, and was admitted into hospital for a week. So I was in there until the 2nd of January. They just gave me a detox through like an IV on a drip, just loads of vitamins and things like that. I was completely honest and open with them about what I was drinking, why I was drinking, the help I needed. And again, after a week, I was just released from there with no follow-on support, no further help. I just kept being told all through these years, oh, you need to go to the doctors, you need to refer yourself for counselling. But I didn't have the mental capacity to do that for myself. I know I wanted it and I know I needed it, but I physically couldn't do it myself. I needed somebody to step in and do it for me. So I left hospital and went back to my flat in Reading. And again, I'd been asking for help and I just wasn't getting it from anywhere. And I actually went to my doctors in Reading at this point and broke down in tears and just explained everything. And again, I was very truthful and honest about what I was doing. I was saying, I don't want to drink. I don't want to drink alcohol anymore, but I don't have any other option. I can't deal with my mental health. At this point, it had gotten really bad, and I was hallucinating in my flat. I was thinking people were breaking in. I was not sleeping for days on end. Some days I wasn't even getting out of bed. I was drinking that much to cope with how I was feeling and the sadness from not being around my children and being away from my family, and my mental health was just going from bad to worse. And I explained all of this to him, and I said, this is the amount I'm drinking. I'm being woken up in the night from choking on my own vomit. And I remember some nights waking up and sitting up in bed, and I would just projectile vomit everywhere, all over the bed, all over myself, and I wouldn't even get up and change it. That's absolutely disgusting. I would literally just burst into tears and just lie back down in all this sick and just go back to sleep. A lot of times I'd woken up in the morning and I'd actually wet myself in the night, and again, I wouldn't get up and change it. I didn't care. I physically didn't care if I lived or died at this stage. And the only times I was awake at this stage was to be drinking enough just to go back to sleep. I just didn't want to be awake. I didn't want to live. I felt like I was just hitting a brick wall, constantly asking for help. And I remember saying to this doctor, I'd researched some tablets called Librium, and they give it to people coming off alcohol to stop the side effects. And whenever I stopped trying to drink at this point, it's the side effects that I couldn't deal with, the shaking and the panic attacks that come with it. It's like the world's worst hangover times a million, and I couldn't deal with it. So the only way I could deal with it was to carry on drinking. So I said to my doctor, I want you to give me these tablets. They're supposed to be really good for people coming off alcohol. I'm drinking, but I don't want to drink. I need your help. And he wouldn't give me the tablets. He said, no, we can't give them to you. You've been in hospital for an overdose before. We can't give you any tablets. I said, well, can you point me in the direction of someone that can? Can I go into hospital or into a rehab? And he was just like, no, there's nothing we can do. Just refer yourself for counselling and try and stop that way. And I remember being in tears and crying to him and saying, I'm telling you now, I'm not leaving here empty-handed. If you don't give me something to help me, I'm going to leave here and I'm going to drink until I die. And he eventually gave me 3 sleeping tablets because I hadn't slept for 4 days at this point. So alcohol wasn't even working to help me sleep anymore. And so he gave me 3 sleeping tablets and I left with them, and I think I took them all that day. I took one as soon as I got home because I just wanted to sleep. Slept for about 4 hours, woke up, drank a bottle of wine, took another one, went back to sleep, and this was just a really repetitive cycle. And at that point, I think from January until June, I drank solidly. And when I say solidly, I mean morning, day and night. This is when I was wetting myself and just laying in it and just being sick all down myself and just crying myself back to sleep in it. Like, I didn't care. I didn't brush my teeth for weeks, didn't bath for weeks, didn't wash my hair. I started to develop really bad agoraphobia, so I couldn't even leave my house. I remember having to call my best friend on the phone, even if I just wanted to go to the shops, usually to get more wine, but even if I needed like food or I wasn't really eating at this point, I'd have to send her a message like during the day and say, like, I need to go to the shop later, can you call me at 5 to 6? And I'll run out the shop while you're on the phone to me, and I'd cover myself up from head to toe because I was just paranoid that someone was going to attack me, or people were talking about me, or people were looking at me, and for months couldn't leave my house. I had to really build the courage up to do it, and I could only do it at night time in the dark. So this went on for a good 5 months, and I then ended up back in hospital. I was actually taken in by ambulance, and at this point I'd just actually been offered a temporary accommodation in Milton Keynes. So after years of fighting with Milton Keynes Council to get some kind of property, they gave me a temporary accommodation, a 1-bedroom flat. But then pretty much straight after I got that, I was taken into hospital by ambulance, and my entire body, including the whites of my eyes, my skin, everything had just turned bright yellow, which I didn't even know that adults could get jaundice. I thought it was just something that babies had. So the paramedics took one look at me and took me straight into hospital. But this time I was in hospital, they did loads of tests, which they'd never really done before. They'd just pumped me full of vitamins and let me go. So they did a load of tests this time. So they did CT scans, ultrasounds, MRIs, and after about 5 days, it was picked up that I'd actually got liver cirrhosis, which is when your liver's that badly damaged from alcohol, it causes physical scarring on it, and a scar is irreversible, so there's nothing you can do for a scar. So it is a lifelong permanent disease, and at this point I was told it was really, really bad. There's certain levels that your liver function tests need to come back as, and I think the normal range is between 0 and 60, and mine at this point were over 3,000. So yeah, really bad. I was told that I needed a liver transplant in order to save my life, but I needed to be sober for 6 months in order for that to happen. But they didn't even know at this point if I was going to make it another 6 months, but there was no way it could be done before. And I remember the doctor coming to my hospital bed when I was in hospital that time, and he just looked me straight in the eye and he just said, "You do know you're dying." And they're words that will just stay with me forever. And I knew that I had to do something. Well, I'd known all along that I had to do something, but at this point I felt like they actually genuinely cared enough to run some tests, and they pointed me in the right direction of people that could help. I actually had somebody come forward and say, you know, I'll put you in touch with this really good rehab place when you leave hospital. And just little things like that that nobody had really done for me in the past. They'd just seen this woman come in and been like, oh, she hasn't got a kid, she drinks all the time, she's a worthless piece of shit, she doesn't deserve any help. And that's just how I kind of felt I was treated by everyone along the way. So then I came out of hospital, and I didn't go straight home. I went straight to a place called Compass, which is for drug and alcohol users, and I was appointed a key worker that day. And this key worker that I had, I can't sing her praises enough. She is one of the most amazing people that I've ever met in my life. I just felt like she genuinely cared about me. She never treated me like an addict. She never treated me like a sick person. She spoke to me like I was her friend. And I was just really touched by how nice she was to me and kind. And I just felt like this woman really genuinely wants to help me. And I thought, God, you know, she actually cares about me. I'm actually worth caring about. Like, these doctors have done all these tests and they're putting all these things in place for me, and this woman's coming in and helping me with the alcohol, and I just really felt like people cared. So yeah, it just made me think, God, maybe, you know, other people care about you. You should care about yourself. So yeah, I left the hospital. That was in July, 3rd of July I left, in 2019. Yeah, and I was told then that I wouldn't have any more children either. And 3 months after that, I actually fell pregnant with my now 9-month-old daughter. At the time I found out I was pregnant with her, I had already been sober for almost 5 months. Would I have carried on drinking at some point or started again? I like to think that I wouldn't, but I genuinely don't know. But yeah, so as much as I always had a reason before, like I always had my other children, for the past 5 years, they've lived with my parents, and as much as they are my children and they'll always be my children, they've not been in my care. So regardless of what I've done or how I've behaved, I know that it's not affecting them, because I know that they're safe and happy and being cared for by my parents. But when I fell pregnant with this baby, I was the only person that could care for this baby. Like, she was growing inside of me. Nobody else could step in and do this for me. I had to do this. I had to make sure that she was safe, that she was healthy. So, you know, that's exactly what I did. And to this day, since leaving the hospital and being diagnosed with that, I've not touched alcohol or drugs since. So yeah, I've been 20 months sober now. So yeah, that's my kind of journey with alcohol, and I just wanted to do this video not for pity or not for people to feel sorry for me at all. That's not what I want, because this story has got the most amazing ending, like I've just explained, and it is possible for people to go through the worst time of their life with addiction and come out the other end. Like, it does happen, it can happen. I'm living proof that it's happened, and I bet if you were to ask a single member of my family, they'd probably would have said to you 2 or 3 years ago, next phone call we get, she'll either be in hospital or dead or killed. There's no way that she's going to recover from this. And I did, because the states I would get in were that bad. Even I would think at points, you know, this is just my life now. There's no coming back from this. I've done too much. You know, I've hurt too many people. I've let too many people down. But all through my drinking, and that's another funny thing, I would always think, like, God, why is everyone attacking me? This is always an attack on me. Like, leave me alone. I'm not hurting anybody. I'm not hurting anybody by drinking. Just leave me be. Just let me deal with things how I'm dealing with it, you know. I always used to say, oh, I'm not stealing from anybody to feed my habit, and I'm not hurting anybody. But looking back at it, again, that's so untrue. Like, I did steal, not like money from my mum's purse, but I stole a mum from my kids, and I stole a daughter from my parents, and I stole a sister from my sister. And so I did, and I did hurt people emotionally. And in the past, I've been hurt really badly emotionally and physically. And I can tell you now, emotional pain stays with you for a very, very long time. So I just want to finish the video just by, I hope it's just educated people a little bit, and just given people a bit of an insight as to what life of an addict is like. It's not fun and games and people just drinking or taking drugs because they don't give a shit about anybody. That's, I mean, it might sometimes be the case, but usually that's not the case. There are usually always underlying reasons why people do the things that they do. And another term I hear all the time is, you can't help someone that doesn't want to help themselves. Sometimes that person can't physically help themselves. You know, I wish years ago someone had dragged me into a hospital and had me sectioned. I mean, I don't know if you can do that without the person's permission. You should be able to. But yeah, you know, sometimes people just need someone to do something for them. So yeah, anybody watching this, if you know somebody that you think is struggling or that you think might be going down that path. I know it's been quite difficult with lockdown for a lot of people, and I'm sure that there are a lot of people struggling with their alcohol intake than they were before lockdown. But please, it ruins lives. Just please be so mindful and careful when you're doing it. I always say, if alcohol's costing you more than money, it's costing you too much. Yeah, so you know, if it's causing you arguments, if it's causing you to lose your temper with your children more, if it's causing you hangovers, if it's causing you to fall out with your friends, if it's costing you anything more than money, which is all it should cost you, then it's becoming a bit of a problem. And to anybody watching this video that is not sure whether they've got a problem or might be developing one, or they're drinking for the wrong reasons even, but they don't really know where to go for help, message me, honestly. I'll meet you for a coffee. I'll come to your doctor's appointments with you. I'll make your doctor's appointments for you. I won't tell anybody. Just please, honestly, don't let it get to the stage that it can get to, because it can get really, really awful. And for some people, there's a point of no return. I remember other words that will always stick in my head when I was in the hospital. When I was discharged, my hepatologist said to me, I've worked on this ward for so many years now, and I've seen so many people come in a much better state than you were, and they don't leave, they die here. He said, you know, I don't quite understand how you've made the recovery that you have in such a short time. So I was allowed out after 2 weeks or 10 days. He said, but you've been given a second chance at life here. Please do not waste it. But going on since leaving hospital, just to quickly finish with, I made some huge lifestyle changes. I got the help I needed. I had therapy last year. I had CBT for PTSD. I'm not even sure if I still have the BPD anymore. I don't know if I've cured it or if I ever had it, or if it's just something that I've learnt to manage. But I take absolutely no medication whatsoever. I've not taken any liver medication for well over a year. I no longer need a liver transplant. I'll still always have the cirrhosis and I'll still always have the scarring, and my liver still isn't as up to scratch as other people's, but the part of it that is working is doing a really, really good job. So I don't need the transplant anymore. I carried my baby almost to full term, and it's unheard of for women with cirrhosis to even fall pregnant, let alone have children. I changed my diet. Again, I don't take no mental health medication. All I take is some health supplements now, and I just eat really well. Surround myself with good people. Yeah, did my therapy, and what turned out to be the worst time of my life has just had the most incredible ending, and I just aim to just keep going up and up and up from here, which I know I will. So yeah, if you've made it to this part of the video and you've managed to listen the whole way, then thank you for listening to my story. I'm sure there's probably loads that I've forgotten to put in there just from being so nervous. And if this video can just help one person either get help or get somebody else help before it's too late, then it was so worth doing. So thank you again.